Part 3, Thriving Without Illusions. Chapter 7, Coping with Reality. Alright, let's see what happens. Coping with Reality is the first section talks about Stephen Callahan's kind of amazing adventure. His boat was capsized, and he had to go 1,800 miles to the nearest land, and he was literally just like a survivor, like Castaway. He was on a small raft, and he used his resources, and he was able to survive because he was a realist. And I think this is kind of the idea of how reality can help you in the end. If you're very aware of your chances of survival, and this is a very extreme case, and you know how much time you have or how long it'll take to get to safety, being very realistic with yourself is going to be your best bet for survival, because every single thing that you do, like, I mean, if you base it off reality, and especially when it comes to survival, um, in a situation like this, it's one of the most invaluable things, because you're not deluding yourself, and if you do delude yourself, you're dead. You know. So that's the idea of coping with reality. This guy was smart. So reading a little bit more, he did a few things that are pretty good. But the main thing that I got out of this is, let's see. There's this mention of, the trait. The trait that saved him was his commitment to finding ways of keeping despair at bay without distorting his map of reality. So that's really good. Being able to have a balance. Like, you have to keep despair at bay, but you have to be you cannot distort your reality. And one way that he did this is that he realized that he might die, so he was writing a book while he was, on his journey. So that even if he writes at one point, like, yeah, you might find me dead, but at the very least, I can rest well knowing that I provided some service as my last act. So that is amazing, and that's a good way to come to terms, with things, to come to terms with reality. Because if reality hits, you need to be able to find a way to take it and somehow make the most out of it. Because reality won't always give you what you want, and sometimes it'll do the opposite. It'll give you exactly what you don't want. And it's about making the most out of it. This next part is very interesting because it talks about coping with, it could be negativity, or it could be coping with something that is painful. And I didn't really expect this book to get into this. And, well, in hindsight, I mean, I did bring up the whole idea that, in order to accept the truth, you have to be strong enough to accept it, and that's the most beneficial way to do it. So this book is going that direction and saying, like, okay, yeah, this is, these are some coping mechanisms when, for example, tragedy strikes or something bad happens. And what's basically being said here is that usually when something bad happens, we have coping mechanisms that we reach for right away. I really like to think of it as you bite into, like, hot, spicy chili pepper, and you didn't know it, and all of a sudden your mouth is raging hot. It's super spicy. You just want to get whatever water is, like, nearest to you and just, like, put it in your mouth. That could be bad for a few reasons. One, you don't know if the water you're taking is purified or if it's good or whatever, but that's the instinct is to like just reach for whatever's there and just like use it. What Julia is saying is that some of our coping mechanisms are not the best, just like with bad water, and they can be self-deceiving. They can be unhealthy, perhaps. Likewise, etc., etc. So, yeah, no, I think this is interesting. Let's jump into it and see what we've got here. So there is a diagram here. What is interesting is that here are the bad things, and here are the good things. There's four bad things, three good things. I won't get into detail too much about it because I want this book to stand on its own merit without me giving away everything. Um, but yeah, there are a few things like um, that don't require self deception. And I guess I'll probably go over it anyway, so okay. But here's the things that don't require self deception. So, three things: counting your blessings, noticing how far you've come, and remember that you can't do more than your best. So, these three things you can use as a coping mechanism, and you're staying completely truthful to yourself and you're not deluding yourself. So, again, counting your blessings, that's great. You know, like that always kind of offsets whatever bad thing has happened. Um, it's way better than just flat out denial or saying it's hopeless or I suck or whatever. Second is notice how far you've come, so you're acknowledging the progress that you have made. You're not looking at what is ahead of you, but the good things that you've done so far. And then the third thing is remember you can't do more than your best. But then I guess you could always ask yourself, am I doing my best? And everybody could challenge that, right? So, but if you really, really are able to truly be like, no, I'm truly doing my best, then it'll help. And if you're not doing your best, you can be like, well, what can I do next time? Or how can I, then you start going into problem solving mode rather than woe is me mode. Awesome. Okay, great. So making a plan. So with making a plan, it's really like playing a scene out in your head and imagining like, okay, so if this happens, like, it's a simulation basically. You just simulate things, and until you come up with a simulation that works well with you, and you have to be very, very good at simulating, right? Or you don't have to be, but you have to like run through different ideas through your mind and be like, okay, no, this is how I want it to be. And this is a really powerful technique, like literally simulation. Um, Before work, um, I would visualize like, okay, these are the motions that I'm going to go through. Okay, how am I going to make it faster? How am I going to improve? How am I going to be more efficient? And I would imagine myself going through the motions. And the important thing is to visualize it very vividly and to be as realistic as possible with yourself. That's the thing with image training. Yeah, that's what it's called, image training. Um, and when you image train, like the more realistic it is in your brain, the more it's like you're like, okay, wait, I can do this. I can actually do this. No problem. That is the best kind of practice you can do, and then you make that your reality. So it stems from a safe simulated environment, and then you play it out and you see how it plays out. So it's very smart. That's planning ahead, making a plan. Great. Silver linings. These are things that so this next session, notice the silver linings. It's noticing that yeah, something bad happened and acknowledging that yeah, it was bad, but there is some good that comes from it. you know this is something that I've learned to really, really cultivate a lot, because you don't want to bullshit yourself. You want to acknowledge, oh shit, well, yeah, that's kind of bad. Example, my father-in-law, before he was my father-in-law, um, I had made some mistakes, in terms of uh, dating his daughter, I guess you could say. And his daughter, my wife, told him about it, and he went up to me and he was like, I've heard all the things you've done. And I responded by being like, oh, well, I guess you know all of it then. Like, I guess you know it. I guess there's nothing to hide. I mean, thank goodness. Like, I guess, I didn't say there's nothing to hide. It's more, but that was kind of like the idea. It's like, oh, well, I guess you know everything then. And he laughed. He laughed with that. And then you know, we ended up kind of really, connecting. So it was really interesting. All right, next one. So the next section, focus on a different goal, is all about someone who prided themselves in being, the best. And then somebody comes in, and then now, because this new person is in, he's trying to explain away, like why he's still the best, or he's still deluding himself. Um, but what you can do with something like that is literally just be like, okay, it's not about me being the best programmer. It's about us kind of like working together. It's about actually making a damn good project. Like throw away your ego kind of thing. So when there's something that doesn't go your way, you can be like, okay, so this doesn't go my way, but is this what I'm really? Why am I so focused on this? Why don't I focus on something else? In the big scheme of things, the bigger picture, isn't this more important? So it's adjusting your your priorities and your goals, and sometimes you find that you have been deluding yourself, right, before, and you're like, oh, why am I thinking about that? So that's interesting. So for this next section, which is things could be worse, I feel like um, when faced with imminent death, and in this case it talks about the AIDS crisis, and there was uh, there was supposed to be a very effective kind of medicine, or was it basically it was a a drug. So it was a drug, and you know it did even worse than the placebo. Um, so as basically it was a placebo. They found out, oh, it really was a placebo. So it did worse than the placebo. So wouldn't that mean that it causes the death more? No, like 1%. There's only like a 1% difference. 92 versus 93% survived the study. So it's, but anyway, so the main thing though, when faced with imminent death, one man said, well, maybe it's our future that we are going to die together and we have to watch each other die, but at least I'm here with you guys. Not people have this kind of group. And that's really just saying, realizing that, I'm grateful. I'm grateful for, even though I'm going to die, I'm grateful I'm still here. I still have something. I don't have nothing. Yowza. So, studies. Does research show that self-deceived people are happier? Well, Julia basically pokes holes in the way that these studies are carried out, the way that they're graded. Um, Basically, is really inaccurate because, again, well, what's interesting is they'll give people these questionnaires, and they will basically say, well, if these people say put a 1 in terms of do I ever get angry, 1 is 7, 7 being I always get angry, 1 is, never get angry, they're lying. They're deceiving themselves. But the thing is, these researchers don't really know about those people. Maybe they really don't get angry, or maybe they're really telling the truth. And therein lies the whole problem of it all. How can you tell if somebody is lying when they're taking a questionnaire or a survey, or how do you even know that they're being honest to themselves? Maybe they are denying themselves. Either way, surveys, they capture what the intended answer is. The answer is that is being pressured to be given is usually the one that will be made also. Some people like to be private about their lives. Maybe they don't want to answer something correctly. But that's interesting. So yeah, there is a bit of like you can't really trust it. I feel, and this goes with any study as well. Especially, it depends on how it was carried out. And apparently, these researchers, it seems like Julia kind of like bites at the end. This research does not tell us much about self deception, though it might tell us something about the researchers themselves. Basically, the researchers are playing the holier than thou act in this case. And yeah, like, so are self deceived people really happier? But isn't this kind of like, what is that um that argument? You're you're attacking the researchers, right? And yeah, that makes sense that maybe they have something, maybe they're kind of like skewing the results. But at the same time, does this really prove that self-deceived people are or are not happier? To me, I feel like it doesn't really. All it tells me is the same thing that I've known, is that maybe don't trust the tests that that are being handled, because they might be flawed. In that respect, everything in this book can also be put under the same question, right? So in that case, it kind of cancels everything out in a way. So it's like, okay, but what? So what kind of proof do we have? That is a question. So that's something that I feel like I'm kind of mm, about with that section. So let's go to the conclusion. We're already almost there. Okay, here we go. Okay. So she admits this on the right after in the next section here, is that, well, yeah, like that doesn't mean that what she just mentioned earlier doesn't mean that self deception can't cause happiness. So she admits that. Huh? She says it clearly can. But then she says that, but there is a downside for self deception. It does erode your judgment. And why should you settle for that? Good question. Good question. I feel like there's a sweet spot. I feel like there are some things are too painful for people to swallow. I mean, the difference between eating, spicy chili pepper is one thing, but then there's the thing of like swallowing like a whole knife, like butcher knife, like some things, you can cope with, some things you can't recover from. So, anyway, sorry, that was an evil laugh. That was very evil. Um, but anyways, though, so yeah, it's interesting. Um, but there are different coping strategies. She does mention something that her friend does, that is something I do. Maybe it's a Christian thing. I think it's a Christian thing. But it doesn't mean you have to be explicitly Christian. Uh, but basically, when somebody like throws shade your way or does something bad, you take it and you're like, okay, well, no, thanks for telling that to me. I'm grateful you're doing that. Um, I think in the Bible, the verse that I'm thinking of that correlates to this attitude is the idea of, so Jesus is basically saying, and this is again paraphrased, and this is from, I'm not too into the different translations. Like, I know people like to specifically say it NIV or NASB, I believe. Um, what I like is I read a version. I mean, it's still a specific translation. It's called the Message, but it's put into layman's terms so that it's really easy to follow. And basically, in this section, Jesus says like, okay, so you guys are Christian, okay, but that doesn't mean that um, when you face adversity and somebody gives you a hard time, it's easy here. It's easy to look at other people who are nice to you and be like, oh, like, I'm gonna be nice to you too. Anybody could do that. Any run of the mill sinner can be nice to somebody who is nice to them. But how do you act when somebody is being aggressive to you? That's where you really shine. And if you really believe in what I'm saying, is that when somebody is being mean to you, you know actually be thankful about it, because they're actually doing you a favor. They're doing you a favor and you don't know it. But uh, so when that happens to you, then uh, yeah, then be grateful, be happy because it's been done. Um, hardship, facing hardship, and all that, it makes you stronger, and that is something to be thankful for. So I was like, oh, that's interesting, you know. And it's true. I feel like it's the whole anti-fragility thing, you know. Like when someone attacks you, obviously, you know, might hurt or whatever, might sting, but again, there are certain things like what I said, like putting chili peppers in your mouth and putting a butcher knife down your throat. Different. There are some things that you cannot repair. Um, so again, it's an interesting thing, but that's the way that I look at it. Um, but regardless, I feel like there's, you know, these are great coping strategies, and it does kind of um, it gives you. I feel like it's like eating vegetables. It's like, hey, or when you're eating healthy for a healthy diet, like, hey, you know, you don't have to bypass. You can be healthy, but that doesn't mean that you have to bypass eating delicious meals. You can still eat delicious meals and you can still be healthy at the same time. So here, I'm going to show you how to do it. That's what Julia is basically doing here in this section of the book, being able to cope with reality, have coping strategies when the reality in front of you is not, you know, palatable, you know, or it's not, you know, or it might be a tough pill to swallow. Um, in the end, I do believe that, you know, there are some things that are, you know, better than others. There's a difference, you know. There may be some things you don't want to put down your throat, I guess, is what I'm saying. And if there is, you know, a reason to justify that, then I'm I'd be curious to hear it, you know. But anyways, those are my thoughts. This was a pretty short, you know, chapter review, but I think it got to the point. And there's nothing more to be said. Great ideas, great thoughts, and those are my thoughts about it. So until next time, have a great day.